Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the TopCyberPro podcast. I'm the founder and CEO of TopCyberPro.com, Jim West, and I have another great guest. I've had a great season. I have to say to all my guests that have been on this season, they've all been spectacular, providing great perspectives and insights into cybersecurity, and also sharing their stories of how they got into cybersecurity. So if you're watching this video thinking you might want to get into cybersecurity, hey, stay tuned. We're going to share information, give you a new perspective and insight in the industry. And what better person to do this with than someone from the Center for Internet Security? I hope I got that right, CIS. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce herself and what she does for CIS.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So thanks for having me on your podcast. My name is Valecia Stocchetti, like you said. I work for the Center for Internet Security. We call it CIS for short, so we can do that from here on out. Currently, I am the senior cybersecurity engineer, or one of them, on the CIS Critical Security Controls team. I've been at CIS for about 8 years, and we can get into a little bit of what CIS does. First, actually, probably be better to do that. So CIS is a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is really to deliver cybersecurity best practices and services products to really internationally. We're globally recognized. So we have a few different sections of our business. So I work on the security best practices side. That's dealing with the CIS controls and benchmarks, which you can get into. There's also another arm of our company, which is the MSISAC and EIISAC. So multi-state information sharing and analysis center, and then elections infrastructure ISAC. And those are focused around elections offices and then state, local, territorial, and tribal governments in the US. So we do a lot all across the globe in different facets. It's a really cool company to be a part of. And I'm really proud to be here for going on 8 years now. I started as an intern.
Mhm. Well, one of the things I'll just, anyone's just hearing CIS for the first time, everybody that's in the cybersecurity industry is aware of who CIS is as an organization and what they do. So some other names I'll throw out there that are on the same level as CIS is like companies like MITRE. A lot of folks heard about MITRE. Then when we talk about security controls, a lot of people have heard about NIST and like the risk management framework, for example. Whereas, the risk management framework, if someone's new to the game that's trying, or a small or medium business owner is trying to say, oh, I heard about this risk management framework. They got like these 100+ controls and all these process control families that I need to try to adapt to my small or medium-sized business. It is immediately overwhelming because you have all these special publication documents. It's all free, but it's just you can get lost in this ocean of information. It's information overload. So one of the great things that this organization CIS has done is they've kind of streamlined it. I don't want to use streamline. I want to say not even simplified it. What they did is they identified through a lot of analysis over the years, because it kind of will change from time to time to meet the ever-changing threat landscape. But what they did is they've analyzed and identified 18 critical controls. So it's known as the critical CIS controls. And everyone in the industry is very well aware of these, because this is like this is like where the baseline is. This is where the minimum security is. You do these 18, and if you can do the 18, you are leaps and bounds ahead of most businesses and organizations that are struggling, that have large budgets and so forth. So this is the great work that they've done, and they're continuously analyzing threats, continuously analyzing, everything that's going on in the threat landscape. So I think I said a lot there, but Valecia, if you could maybe explain a little bit more about the why the critical security controls.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I'll just kind of give a quick overview of how they're structured. So you mentioned the top 18 high-level controls. So those are things like, hardware and software asset inventory. We actually call them enterprise assets now instead of hardware, because really it's not hardware anymore, right? It's all virtualized and a lot of different ways that you can spin it. So from there are 153 safeguards, which are really just actions to take to achieve the top level controls. So, for example, inventorying your enterprise assets, allow listings. So those very specific actions to take below the top level control. And really, once you get into it, I mean, like you said, there are many organizations that use NIST, ISO. There's all different kinds of flavors of frameworks out there, and it can get overwhelming. I think the nice thing about the controls is that a couple of things. One is that we really work to bridge the gap between not just saying we have to use our framework, but if you are using the NISTs and ISOs of the world, you can use the CIS controls to bridge that gap. We do a lot of mappings. We have Thomas Sager, who's our chief cartographer. He does, I think, I don't even know how many mappings he's done, but we currently have over, I think, 29 frameworks or something like that we map to. So, and we have internationally, right? So like New Zealand, Australia, all different types of different regulations and frameworks. The other thing is that we did one of the projects I worked on, the community defense model, is really kind of one of our babies, I'd call it, right? So it's a project that actually started before me by Tony Sager, who's our chief evangelist. And he really wanted to have a way to back our decisions with data and not just saying, this is a good list of things to do. So throughout the years, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report has been published. We've been contributors many years to that, and also, have mentions for the controls in there. And so we used that as sort of the anchor for the first version of CDM. And then when I took it over, what I did was I went out and not just Verizon DBIR, but also looked at other threat reports, right? Because there's a lot of good ones from CrowdStrike and all the other big players in the industry, and looked at seeing what they're saying. And what happened is that there were common themes, right? They were always talking about ransomware or web application hacking or things like that, insider threats. And so using that data to then map it to the controls and then actually make it actionable for people to use, and saying, if I want to defend against ransomware, what are the things I have to do, right? What are the bare minimum that I have to do? We also introduced the concept back in version 7.1 of implementation groups. So we call them IGs for short. There's 3 of them, IG 1, 2, and 3. And the IGs are a way for people to prioritize implementation of the controls. So even if you take a framework of 153 safeguards, right, it still could be overwhelming, because where do you start? Do you just start at 1 and then work your way down? It might be years by the time you get done. So the IGs are a way to divide that into a smaller chunk to focus on, right? You have to take inventory of your devices before you go and securely configure them. That's just common sense. But it's a hard thing to do, right? Like inventory is one of those things we always talk about. So anyways, those are, I think, the selling points of using the controls. They're just very straightforward, prescriptive, simplified, and easy to follow.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to interject when you said about the assets or having an inventory of what you have. There's that old saying, until you know what you have, you don't know how to secure it. Well, most people think, well, shouldn't a company that spends money on things have ledgers and accountants and all these invoices and ways to track it? Well, let me tell you this. When's the last time for the people that's watching this is where I'm directing the question. Ask yourself, the last time you moved from like an apartment to another apartment or one house to another house, you just moved and relocated. How many times you always say to yourself, wow, why do I have all this stuff? You never realize how much stuff you got until you actually got to put it in the boxes and actually move it around. And that's the same thing with asset management. It is a very tedious task to try to identify every single thing that you have. And the thing is, it only takes like one device, one unsecured device to be the pivot point into your network. And that's how easy it can be, just one device away or one user that clicks the bad link, like all the stories we hear. But another thing you said that might have perked up a lot of people watching this video. We've heard a lot about ransomware in the past like 3 to 5 years, right? We've heard about, governments having ransomware attacks. We've heard of school districts where their entire, they've had to shut down because they didn't, couldn't access their school records. And, a lot of schools have been falling victim to this because they don't have the $1 million budgets that Fortune 500 companies have. So we've heard about schools, police stations, all kinds of these organizations that service our communities that have been, just ravaged by ransomware. Could you maybe, just for person watchers, kind of give maybe the high level definition of what ransomware is, and then maybe go one step deeper to explain why it's successful?
Yeah. So at a high level, ransomware is there's a few different ways that it works. There's different flavors of ransomware, but the main thing that we often see is that they encrypt the files once, for example, maybe you have a port open on your server like RDP, which is a very common one, or a phishing email that comes through. You click on it, it downloads an executable or malicious program, and then next thing you know, all of your files are being encrypted. And if you're the unlucky one, the systems on your network that it's connected to or able to get to then also get ransomed, right? And so it can become a very hairy situation very quickly. I've seen it where people get lucky and it's just for one system. I've seen it many times where it's the whole network is hosed. And it kind of goes further, right? It's like if you don't have backups that are not tied to your system, right? You think that it kind of is logical, right? You don't want to have it impact your backups because then if your backups are infected, then how are you going to ever recover?
Exactly.
So you hear these stories in the news all the time. And it's kind of interesting because as much as we've evolved in technology, the threats really stay the same, right? It's somebody had RDP open, somebody clicked on a phishing link, and it's kind of terrifying to think that one small link or one open port can really hose a network. And it gets even more scary when you can't recover your data. So there's, like I said, many flavors, and one of the newer ones in the last few years are extortion, right? So either taking some data before they encrypt it, it could be a bluff or real, depending, because
You don't know.
you don't really know. And then all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, I've got your stuff. If you don't pay me,
I'm
doesn't
gonna put
matter
it
if
out
you
on the
have your
internet.
backups. We're going to put it on the internet, right?" And then what do you do? And if it's teetering on like data breach notification laws that you then need to deal with, it's like, well, now what do I do? So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So it definitely can be troublesome, right? It's it's kind of one of those things when I started in the industry that was really big, and then it went away a little bit when Emotet started to rise, and then they were like, "Oh, we found a great new way to do Emotet, or plus Ryuk, or another flavor of ransomware,"
Mhm.
and now it's just sort of running rampant again because it's
You
an
know,
easy thing.
You
It's
know, there's a
just it
lot of
is.
avenues in there that when we talk about, the threats kind of stay the same. It's also the security standards and practices that, when you think about it, you mentioned backups, right? And when you really start to understand the controls surrounding just backing up your data, you just mentioned that there most of these businesses and organizations had the backups already connected to the server, and they didn't store it off-site or in a cryptographically separated or isolated part of their network. They didn't do that, so there was no protection or separation of that backup data from the network, so therefore it got encrypted too. So then the backups go out the door, or their backups were not being validated and tested, so they don't know how long the intruders were in the network. That's another issue when you mention artifacts still, from the attackers in your data. Like PlayStation hacked. They got hacked. They restored services, I forget, 5 days later, and then they got hacked again in 24 hours because they didn't do eradication appropriately. But the other thing about the backups is some of these businesses didn't back up on a frequent enough basis. So even when they went to backups, they found that they lost sometimes, 60, 90 days plus of data. So it was almost, irrelevant given the pace of the data operations that they go through. But that's just the backup defense. That's the kind of your recovery, one of your, I guess, plan Bs. Plan A is, user access, just simple account management where not everybody should have privilege level access across the network, right? Having, appropriate, account management is a very simple thing to do to keep people from being able to access servers and other devices on the network beyond the need to know, or the, what's the word I'm looking for? Least privileged is the better term. But yeah, there's so many of these standards. Is there a couple other standards since we're talking about ransomware? Because people are like, okay, you mentioned backups, having more frequent, storing them offsite. Okay, got it, got it, got it. Account management. Okay, we can start looking into that. But what is another couple one twos that you're seeing that are basic security practices that people should be making sure are being done to protect against ransomware?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I really hit the bigger ones. I would say the other thing is secure configurations, right? So we talked about RDP. One of the things that goes along with just RDP, like setting appropriate security around RDP, are the secure configurations, right? So we don't want to have it open to the world. Things like that, because there's scanners out there and they'll just hit whatever open port is free to use, right? They don't care. It's the low-hanging fruit concept. A lot of times it's opportunistic, right? When you get into Fortune 500, then it sometimes can become more targeted and that kind of
More
thing. But
nation state level at that point. Yeah.
right, right. But yeah, so I would say secure configurations are the biggest. In fact, when we did CDM 2.0, that was one of the things that was ranked the highest were the secure configurations. And I say that because we offer CIS benchmarks, which are secure configurations. So it goes beyond your account management, which is incredibly important, and also your data management, but also making sure that those system level configurations are set properly for the technologies that you're using in your environment. And the other thing too is just in general, right? Like beyond specific actions to take, it's all iterative, right? So as soon as you set something, it's not set it and forget it, because if you're following that sort of mindset, you're really going to get caught in a bad place eventually, because your security will atrophy, right? Things change, new settings come up, or you have something where it's like, oh, all of a sudden, I thought I was good, and then now it's removed that security setting and I didn't even know it, right? Or it's canceling out something else because new technology has come out and changed the way they're doing things. So it's important to kind of look at it from a holistic point of view, but also iterative.
Yeah, and Valencia has brought up some great points about, in the defense world, we call it STIG, Security Technical Implementation Guides, but the CIS has the security benchmarks, which for operating systems and all kinds of other things that you could, run these checklists and benchmarks against the devices and software that you have in your organization. And so, yes, securing it, what it does is, if you have an operating system, let's say everything's supposed to be open and ready to be available for everyone to use. That's generally the nature of how we want to operate on the internet. We want everything to be open and free. But when it comes to security, you got to start shutting down those extra ports, shutting down those extra services that you don't need. Sometimes it could be bloatware and other things that get added on a machine. You want to shut all those things down, because what it does is reduces your attack surface to where it doesn't give a lot of avenues for the attacker to come in and compromise or pivot from your machine to another one in the network. So that's a great, great tip there. Another thing that a lot of folks, especially if you're a business owner, is there's basic what I would say COOP DRP, or continuity planning / disaster recovery planning, plays a factor into this, because a ransomware attack is a equivalent of a continuity issue or a disaster for your business. And doing the basic things like a business impact assessment, like rating what services and data is most critical to your day-to-day operations and to your business. And then starting that from an information-centric approach, deciding, okay, how are we safeguarding this information? What are the layers of defense that we're building around it? And of course, that's a much deeper discussion that we don't want to get into on this podcast. But starting with a business impact assessment, so again, like that hardware asset, that enterprise assets inventory that you want to do to know what you have. You also need to know what the priority of those things, because if you have a database that's got customer information in it, and there's regulations and other things you have to adhere to protect that information, that's a good place to start. Is what's the priority of things on your network, and that's when you start getting into deeper planning, like network segmentation and cryptographic isolation type of architectures and so forth. But a lot of folks, they kind of rely on industry to kind of give them that magic silver bullet. And we hear of these things from time to time. A few years ago, it used to be called IDAM, or it was first IAM, Identity Access Management, then it became IDAM, and then there was a couple acronyms. And now that we've seen it now migrate and transform into something called Zero Trust Architecture. ZTA has been the buzzword for a few years now, and a lot of folks think that that's the saving grace. And I try to advise people, it's a step in the right direction to become more secure, to raise your security posture. But again, you have to be mindful of the little things and the little pieces, such as, like you mentioned, securing your devices, doing the basic practices still, because again, it's all about reducing attack surface. You'll never eliminate the attack surface, because there's so many layers and facets to an organization, from the people to the systems and services to even the systems and services you don't control, like cloud providers, ISPs, and everything else you rely on to do your business. But with that being said, what are your perspectives, Alicia, in regards to the like zero trust architecture and other technologies that people think, like these new AI assisted CM tools and incident response tools that are being marketed now? What are your perspectives on these things? Because people do believe that that's going to be, technology will save them.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. So that you mentioned the silver bullet, and that's something that I've always talked about in a lot of my papers and just to talks. it's hard, right? Because they're like, oh, I want one tool to do it all. And I won't name names, but you can see what happens when one tool does it all, right?
Yeah.
It's not often a good idea to have the one tool that does it all. Because you're relying, right, on one thing. If that thing goes down or something happens, there is no backup.
Yeah. All your
So
eggs in one basket.
that's right. So that's where the defense in depth, concept comes in place because you can have different security tools or defenses that are in place so that if something goes down, you have a backup in order to make sure that you're covered. The other thing is that, I mean, zero trust is a great methodology, right? And that's really what it is. It's a methodology to work towards identity and access management and other facets as well. Um, I think buzzwords can sometimes get frustrating in the cybersecurity industry, right? The AI aspect is really interesting because it's coming up pretty quick, right? Like it's very quick for adopting. I won't say it's slower on the securing end because there are obviously like NIST release guidance. There's other guidance out there, but I think it's interesting because it's it's your data, right? It's another layer. With AI, it is your data, and you need to make sure that you know where it's going. Because if you don't know where it's going, right, that data could be regulated, like you said, and then all of a sudden you're caught in a spot where what do you do? Because you're already released it to the AI application. How do you know what servers it's going to? How do you know how they're protecting your data? And it really, it's a third party, right? You're releasing your data to a third party, and depending on how they secure it, you're responsible for making sure it's the best approach to handling that data out there. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting time to be in cybersecurity. I don't know that I have any of the answers, probably a lot of more theories.
Yeah. Well,
We'll see how it pans out.
I would just advocate, just as one of the mottos of the old school mottos of the IC Square ethics was, do care, due diligence as a cyber professional. And, when it comes to things like adopting new emerging technologies or new systems, you're right. The data, what kind of regulations and laws and policies and things that you have to adhere to, depending on your industry and the business that you operate in. And then, of course, the cost of that data, whether it's, let's say you're not a company that's beholden to regulations, but let's say you're a commercial company like Coca-Cola with their trade secrets, right? If you have trade secrets or proprietary information and data that you need to protect, you should really think about that information-centric approach. But with that all being said, you have to, do your due diligence, not just because Cyber Guy says, hey, we need to get this new AI system in, or the executive and the board says, hey, we heard about this thing at a conference and we saw a video on it. We want this new shiny thing to protect, to be our silver bullet. You do need to do the due process of involving your legal review team. You need to involve all your stakeholders into a decision like this because, I was at a conference where a major vendor was touting their incident response, their automatic AI incident response. And I cautioned quickly to the audience. I said, we still need human interaction. AI is great for doing a lot of repetitive and what I will call very low level type of tasks. But when it comes to things of just making the decision to shut down operations or to potentially impact customers, this is where we got to have someone that has to look at the what I call actionable intelligence and make a decision. And then it should be a stakeholder or someone that's been empowered by the board and owners of the company. So, a lot more thought needs to be put into this before you hand the reins over to a system that's intending to do well. And I will cite a recent case. I won't say who it was, but there was someone that's a cloud provider that actually denial of service some of their customers in a region in the South American region. And it was funny because it was their AI system that did it. It was their automatic response that denial of service. It was very limited in the impact to its customer base. So it was only in that one particular region. And of course, to slow down legitimate traffic getting in. And so it was unfortunate that it happened, but and it was the very same vendor. I won't mention who they were, but the very same vendor that I just kind of spoke at a conference about. But anyhow, back to our talk about the great work that CIS does and your team does. Could you maybe tell us what a day in the life of working with your team is like?
Yeah. So like I said, I work on the CIS Controls team. A day in our lives could be vastly different. A lot of the times we work with a lot of community members. And so often we might be answering their inquiries or their questions, through adoption of the CIS controls, and they have questions that come up. We could also be doing speaking engagements. We travel around the world, sometimes even the country. I think last year one of our own went to Germany to speak. So we do a lot of outreach, community outreach. We work with a lot of organizations. You mentioned NIST and MITRE. We work with, even beyond them with partnerships and things like that. We also write white papers. We do a lot of white papers. I'm working on some right
Excellent
now,
papers, by
actually.
the way. Excellent papers.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I think we chatted earlier about or offline about CDM. I mentioned CDM in here. I've worked on CIS RAM, the risk assessment method. I've worked on the blueprint for ransomware defense, which is in partnership with the Institute of Security and Technology, IST. That was a few years ago, and other companies as well that contributed to that. Yeah, so a lot of different projects with that. And then also just keeping the CIS controls up to date. So we come out with new versions from time to time. We don't try to rock the boat too much because adopting a framework is a lot. So changing it is even more
Yeah.
cumbersome. But we just released version 8.1 in, I believe, June of this this year, 2024. So we're working, it was a minor update, but we did a lot of cleanup with like asset classes and smaller things, enhancing the glossary. And we also adopted NIST CSF 2.0, including governance. So that was a really, bigger piece of the update. And yeah, so other than just kind of making sure the lights are on and the doors are open is making sure that our community is supported in whatever way that they need to be supported.
Okay, wonderful. So what I like to do, Alicia, and I do this with all my guests, is I like to tell you, if we was to get in a time machine and go back to the day one that you decided that you wanted to make IT cyber your career, right? What is the story around day one?
Oh, we'd have to go through day -0 for that, or -1. I had a really weird breakthrough in the cyber industry. So I did not like computers that much when I when I first entered the workforce many moons ago. I was actually an X-ray tech. I went to school for that, and it turned into I ended up switching to marketing, not for school, but for work. And I worked in the marketing field for probably 6 years. And then I just jumped ship and I started at a startup, and they had me file credit card chargebacks. That their e-commerce platform was hemorrhaging at the time. And they were probably a stack, like, I don't know, that big. And I ended up, opening my mouth because I normally do like that. And I'm like, what are we doing about this? And they're like, I don't know, do something about it if you don't want to see them anymore. And I started implementing, found myself quickly implementing a system to stop the fraud through software, through secure
Nice.
configurations, through processes. And before I knew it, I was running like a fraud prevention team, which was kind of cool. Because it was a startup, I think it gave me the freedom and the leverage to do that kind of thing. I don't think I'd have that in another company without some sort of formal education and
Mhm.
know-how, but they apparently trusted me to do it.
And
And yeah,
and
it
here
worked
we
out.
are.
So I ended up going back to school shortly after that for digital forensics in my undergrad. And I actually just finished my master's with in information security in
Congrats.
May. Thank you. Yeah. So now, I mean, when I started at CIS, I was an intern in their computer forensics department. So I was doing computer forensics and incident response for state and local governments. And it just sort of clicked. Like I realized that all the things in my past just sort of helped shape where I was going. And I knew that I had found my passion, which is so funny because all the things I hated doing when I was growing up, like writing and researching and research papers, and now it's like all I do, and I love it. So I'm glad that it turned around.
I can identify
And
when you say
yeah,
when you hate to write. So I'm also an author and I write fiction and nonfiction. And I tell you, when I'm writing topics, let's say I'm doing a report for something I'm not really passionate about, it's like nails on a chalkboard, pulling teeth to get the words to the paper. But when it's something like fiction, when I'm creating worlds and my mind is just flowing with the thoughts, it's like, it's like when you're reading a good book, the world ceases to exist around you. So I definitely
yeah,
can identify with that. What I love about your story is that you was heading in one direction in your career and in one direction in the job market, and then you decided, I'm going to jump ship over and try something new. A lot of folks that might be watching this video right now, they might be on the fence and say, I hear a lot about cyber's always got openings, there's jobs in it, but they may be coming from field where, well, you know what, they're going to look at my resume, see I got like 10 plus years in whatever career field I've been kind of stuck in, where I've either hit my ceiling or I have no room for growth or nothing, no upward movement. And I'm looking at maybe, switching over. What would you say to these folks that are kind of on that fence, that feel like, they don't think that they can do it?
I would say do it. Just do it. Just like Nike says, right?
I love it.
It I think one of the things that was the scariest for me is the fear of the unknown, right? And I mean there's so many very famous people that have made great quotes about fear. And but they're all true, really, at the end of the day, is like often you're the roadblock to your own success. If
Yeah.
depending on certain factors. It's most of the time it's just getting in
Getting out of your own
and
way.
right, exactly. And so for me, one of the things that I had fueling me wasn't actually encouragement. Not necessarily like my family was very encouraging and things like that, but a lot of people that like my job, not here, a different job, were sort of like, um, critical, right? Like, oh, you can't do this unless you are educated in it or have a degree. And I sort of let that fuel me, which is interesting, right? I had like the opposite reaction because I could have certainly just let it get me down and been like, yep, I'm terrible. I'm never gonna make it, like the end.
Well, I'm glad you
Um,
didn't.
yeah, no, me too. So I think one of the things I mentor a lot of students from, elementary school up to adults. I mean, the last person I mentored owned a yoga studio and wanted to get into cyber, and they went through a boot camp. So I think my biggest thing is that, even if life doesn't take you down the cyber route immediately, um, that's okay. If you're thinking about switching into it, just try it, right? Like either go to school, find a class, find a boot camp, take a certification. There's tons of free stuff out there these days. It's free. You don't have to, pay thousands of dollars for it in order to get an education. I mean, certainly the educational route is great because I mean, I've lived it, so I'm going to be a proponent of it. But the other thing is that um like getting internships if you want to do decide to go into the field. And the other thing is that leveraging your skills that you have now. So like a lot of people, I've worked with the best and brightest, and sometimes their technical skills are not the strongest suit. Um, I feel like sometimes the soft skills, the communication, the teamwork, those go a long way versus the technical skills. Obviously, there are some positions that require technical skills. Like I'm not going to sit here and say if you're just a super nice person, you're going to make it very
Well, I
far.
always advocate to
But
hire the right person that fits with the team and not the acronyms behind their name. I
yes,
mean, I got every cert in the book, but it's all about, can I work well with a group of people? Because if I can't communicate, if I think that I'm better than everybody else and I got a chip on my shoulder, an attitude, or I think knowledge is power, that is not the person you want on your team. But when you get a
yes,
person that's a sponge, that's willing to learn, absorb, and grow with your team, then you can move mountains. It takes two people to move a couch, right? Um, one of the things you said though that I want to come back to, you mentioned the word mentor, and like I mentor usually about 7 to 8 people a year as I have time. The last person I mentored was a male nurse. He was making maybe 14, $15 an hour. He hated his job. And so just by chance, through another colleague, I got connected with him, helped him get certified on a few certs, and then eventually got a secret clearance and he's working a job. He went from making, I think, barely 30,000 a year to now he's making 70 something thousand a year. He more than doubled his salary. Super happy with helping mentor. Has there been people along your career path that, people that you want to like, shout out their names or just kind of acknowledge people that might have mentored and helped you along your journey?
yeah. I mean, for me. There's so many. A lot of the executives actually at CIS have been wonderful in different points in my life when I needed some guidance or just sort of support to figure out like what I wanted. And, originally what I thought I wanted, which was upward mobility, wasn't actually exactly what I wanted. I wanted to have more technical ability. So that was an interesting point, right? Because I actually went from being a manager on the CERT team or the CERT to going to the engineering role, right? Which was completely different. I wasn't managing a team anymore. Um, and yeah, so I think who else? I'm trying to think. There's so many people, honestly. It's
No worries.
the list is endless. A lot of them too are like my college professors from my undergrad and my master's were really supportive, and they still are, even as like an alumni. I went to Champlain College online, and they have been awesome, really, really supportive. So
Excellent. You mentioned, this, for anyone watching again, there's just Google cybersecurity training. You're going to find 1,001 sites. Of course, TopCyberPro.com is there. I'll just throw that out there. But there's what I call YouTube University. There's, if you're just looking like starting with, let's say, a Security Plus, but there's a cert that I've been advocating for a year plus now. ISC Square has a program called 1 Million Certified in Cybersecurity. It is the CC cert, Certified in Cybersecurity. It is very entry level. It would be what I would say the first step that's free to give you a free test voucher, free training. You just got to go sign up on their site. In fact, I'll put the link in the description below. But if you're watching this and you just want to kind of dip the toe in the water cyber, take this free training. It's excellent training. Even if you don't go into cyber, it's great training for anybody out there, whether you're a receptionist, an analyst, help desk, all the way to the C-suite. It's good training for everybody. And you get a free voucher to go take and sit down and take a certification. And if you like it, then that's building block one. Then you could work towards, like, let's say a Security Plus or some other cert, and then start to really look into where you want to go into cybersecurity, because there's so many avenues you could go: management, compliance. You could go into, pen testing and, SOC work. There's so many avenues to get into cyber. What I like to do now is I like to kind of take a break from all the tech talk, because I know we've shared a lot of information, and but I do this thing where I kind of do a quick speed round. It's super quick, where I ask some questions. There's no right or wrong answer, just whatever answer comes to your mind. And if you're ready, we'll go.
I wanted to mention one thing before you say
Oh,
that. I actually just took ISC2CC certificate in
excellent.
cybersecurity, and it was great. So highly recommend it. I'll just add that plug.
So I'll add my plug as well. So my fiance passed it. She took about 5 days to do the training, and she's really new. So she spent about 2 years training under me. She's got SISM. She's got like five, six certs now. But she took the CC as one of her first certs, and she took 5 days. And I've had soldiers that I mentor that have spent the weekend. Like, these guys got nothing better to do, but they spent 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, did the training, and then like on Monday, Tuesday, took the test and passed. So a lot, it's very achievable credential to get. But like I said, for anyone that wants to just dip their toe in the water, hey, it's free training, free cert. You can't ask for anything better. The link is below. Definitely register. It's a great thing, initiative that ISC Square is doing, and I love that they're doing that for the world. The speed round, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
So the first question. Sorry, I got thrown off that. So no right or wrong answer. So first one out the gate is Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
All right, Star Wars. Okay. Cake or pie?
Pie.
Pie. What kind of pie?
Apple.
Apple pie. All right.
Good old apple pie.
Good old apple pie. What is your most favorite book you've read of all time? And what was the last book you've read?
Oh, okay. Last book I read. Uh, actually, I'm reading a book right now about near-death experiences. It's just
Interesting.
really interesting.
Okay.
The best book I've read. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It took me 10 years to finish that book. I kept putting it up and down, or putting it, reading it, putting it down, but it was pretty good. So,
So after 10 years and finally finishing the book, what was the one thing that you could take that you took away from it?
I just couldn't believe that the guy who wrote it was like threatened to be killed in order to not publish the book, which I thought was insane.
Very,
But
truth is
yeah,
stranger than fiction, right?
yep.
And last question, is a hot dog a sandwich?
I just had a hot dog for lunch, and I will say it's absolutely a sandwich. It's got bread, it's got meat, it's a sandwich.
All right. So, is there any personal projects, nonprofits, or charity work, volunteer work that you do outside of day job number one? I like to talk about these things because a lot of my guests are involved in great initiatives. Like one of the big initiatives I'm a real big supporter of is women in cybersecurity as well as STEM for all ages and so forth. I'm a big supporter of STEM, of course. I wrote a book series that focused on a female protagonist and that really, back in like the 90s, there was studies that were done that when girls reach puberty, their math scores and science scores tended to drop. And there was a great campaign by Always that was called Like a Girl, it was hashtag Like a Girl. And it had a powerful message because in the commercial, they had a young girl that said, throw the ball like a girl, run like a girl. And they're just hightailing and just running it. Then they would ask girls that were teenagers and in their 20s to run like a girl. And they were just, something shifted during the years of puberty, and it was a very powerful message that I was a big supporter of because I was a single parent to two daughters, and I wanted to instill in them that they could be anything. And another message, I don't want to go too far off the topic, but like Disney, as much as people love Disney, they always tend to focus around princesses. And I get it, it's good for their brand, but in our reality, not everybody can be a princess. It's make believe. But what I wanted my daughters to look up to is like, Ada, great mathematician. There's been, oh my goodness, Marie Curie, Emily Noether, who Einstein praised on more than one occasion. Mathematicians. There are great women mathematicians. I'm trying to remember the woman from Iran right now that won not the Archimedes. I think it the Archimedes medal. She might have won the Archimedes medal. But anyhow, there's been just a plethora of great mathematicians, doctors, scientists, engineers, researchers that I wanted my daughters to look at these professions as heroes, because that's what we should be, elevating in our society. Besides, I mean, obviously, it's the sports athletes, the celebrities, the actors, and musicians that get elevated in our society. But I wanted them to, and so in my fantasy series, my wizards are from ancient Greece. So my Gandalf is Archimedes, so he's the father of pre-calculus, right? So he's like my Gandalf. I have Pythagoras. So these guys are, there's this young girl from our world, 12 years old girl that goes into this other world where math is magic, and she learns more about mathematics, and so it's inspired so many kids to go from failing or C level and below to honor roll. And I've been very proud. I've won 13 awards for that series, but I've been a big supporter of that. But what are some nonprofits, organizations, volunteer work that you do in your free time?
Yeah, so I actually sing in my spare time. So I actually am part of my church choir,
Oh, nice.
which is yeah, I've been singing since oh God, 28 years, I think.
Nice.
So that is one of my passions. But I also in the past year, I actually joined a board of a nonprofit called the Ohana Foundation, and they are a nonprofit that helps families in the capital region of New York or upstate New York who have lost a child, a baby. So they help them emotionally and financially. And it's a cause that's pretty near and dear to my heart as well. So that's been really nice to have worked with them over the past year, and I'll continue to do so. And then I also I really love to volunteer for the Special Olympics. I've done it. I started doing it like, oh my goodness, probably over 15, 20 years ago. I started my first volunteer activity at one of their games. I don't know if it's the fall games. And it was really heartwarming just to learn more about the players and all that stuff. And then I had a hiatus, and I started volunteering again the past couple of years. And again, it just warms my heart, and I'm really happy that I've gotten back into it. In fact, their fall games are coming up, so I've got to figure out what I want to volunteer for. And then I also I do some work with Big Brothers Big Sisters through CIS. We have a
Nice.
volunteer arm called CIS Cares, and they actually give you 40 hours a week, not a week, sorry, 40 hours a year to use towards volunteering for, either CIS Cares events or your own initiatives that you want to do outside of work that are for volunteering. So it's really nice to be able to have that because, it's not just about the day-to-day work, right? We're also here for a bigger purpose. And yeah, it's really good.
So I love asking that question because I get to hear from, level 99 professionals like yourself that at the top of your game, and even though you're at the top of the game, most people think, oh, you must have a demanding work schedule, demanding life, and that at the end of the day, you don't want to do nothing else but shut down and that you still have energy and heart to give to other causes and help other people and help your community. So kudos and thank you for doing the extra mile effort once you leave the office. So definitely appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're getting close to wrapping up, and I know your time's super valuable. But back to the topic of the CIS controls, and we've shared a lot of great information and perspectives here. But let's say if there was, we could start maybe with the 18. But let's say a business cannot do all 18, right? I recently got acquainted with the Essential Eight in Australia, and I think it's a great initiative because it's like really takes it down to like bare bones with the Essential Eight. But with the 18 CIS controls that we've mentioned before. If a business can only do, let's say, just what's the three they should start with? And I know this, I'm putting you on the spot, but if a business today, let's say it's a plumbing business, it's sole proprietor, he's going to have a couple computers. Someone is going to be, handling his finances on one computer. He's probably going to have another computer. He might get a VPN and set up with his ISP. That's it. He's got an extra internet line at home. If he had to look at these 18 controls, he said, look, if you just start with these three, what would those three be?
So I will not pick three, but it's because with the CIS controls, I had mentioned the implementation groups. And one of the things that we really push is essential cyber hygiene, which is actually IG1. And so, what I would say to a small company, I mean, it is really designed for a small company. A lot of it is like policy driven, obviously. Maybe, the plumber might not have every single policy that we, or different policies. They might just have it all in one. But however way you slice it, it is a very small lift compared to, an IG2 or IG3, asking them to do things like application allow listing and pen testing and all that crazy stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times, not to get off track, but people are like talking about pen testing, and I'm like, great, have you inventoried your devices? They're like, no, 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 but pen testing, and I'm
They're
like,
worried
oh
about
my
the hot
god,
buzzword, not the
I'm like,
basics, right?
right. I'm like, you'd have no business doing pen testing until you figure out the first, essential like IG1 things. So I would say that IG1, or not, I would say CIS says really is that IG1 is where you start. It also, when I go to mention the community defense model, when we did, it's an alignment to MITRE ATT&CK. So that was the whole premise for the paper. And one of the things that is the data point we got out of it is that 74% of MITRE ATT&CK techniques and sub techniques can be defended against by implementing IG1. I mean, think about how powerful that message is, right? Now, critics could say like, well, what about 100%? We talked about the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet, right?
No.
Like there's nothing that's going to get you to 100. Maybe pretty close, but you're still going to be, there's always threats and you're always
Yeah.
going to be exposed to a certain degree. So anyways, I would say though, if you had to pick, if you made me pick three things, I would say inventorying your devices, hardware and software enterprise assets, data management, right? Because data has pretty much become king or queen out there, and secure configurations, right? Is like those are the three, and they're all in IG1, all
And,
of
and
them.
and there it
So
is, IG1. If you can follow that guidance and implementation, if you're a small business and you're like clueless to security, you can't afford paying someone 50 plus an hour to come fix your things for you. You got to do it on your own. Start with, the security benchmarks is a great start. Just get your operating system up to date, get run the benchmark for your operating system and then the applications that you can find benchmarks for. Get your system secured as much as possible. That's a great step that most people don't do. Most people just assume it auto updates and that's good enough. No, it's not. Go to CIS. You just look up YouTube. There's going to be at least 100 plus videos of how to implement IG1 or how to just do a security benchmark test against your machine or how to check your settings. So again, reduce the attack surface on your machine. So if you're a plumber and you got two laptops in your business, that's a great start. Just right there is doing that and so forth. And then again, there's so much free information and training that all you got to do is just look for it, look and you'll find it, and then go over to CIS's website, which I'll have a link below, and then any other links that Valecia you'd like to share with me, I will gladly put them below. For people to connect to you and just kind of keep track of your great career and the work that you're doing in the industry, where's the preferred way that people can connect and follow you?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's probably the most active that
Well, I'll put that.
application that I that I'm on. I have a Twitter account, but admittingly, or X, I should say. But I don't really use it a lot.
That's
So
fine. All right. Well, I'll have
my
her LinkedIn
husband does.
below. So if you want to follow Alicia and the wonderful things, because she's done great papers. In fact, I'm going to definitely put the one on the ransomware and living off the land attacks. That's going to be in the description below. Highly recommend, even if you're an experienced cybersecurity professional, read that document. It is excellent. It was well put together. So kudos to you and your team for the great work that you do with CIS. And again, it's great that we have people like you that made that decision to come into cyber, and cyber is better for it. So thank you, Alicia, for everything you do.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.